class.
Yay. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Scott isn't able to be with us today because he's at the Long Beach meeting. So I'm kind of doing all the hosting and trying to control, you know, sound and stuff. So I would like to ask everyone to mute themselves during the meeting. This will be a more interactive presentation. So if you'd like to ask a question, just unmute yourself. That way I don't have to mute everyone and be in control of that, because it's going to be really hard for me to mute everyone and unmute people when they want to ask the question. So I will trust all of you to mute yourselves now and then unmute yourselves with any questions you might have. So I will take it to Jade Neely, our program co-coordinator, who will introduce our presentations for the day.
Good afternoon. And Gary and I were talking. He had seen a newsletter where there were they had a panel of experts from their group do a talk similar to this, and we thought that there are plenty of people here in our group that have, you know, special knowledge of plants and soils, and then we're deciding on who we wanted, and so that's who we chose. And I'm really pleased to introduce Maria, Mike, Laurel, and Gary, who are going to be telling us their secrets of growing and soil and how they treat their plants. They all are in different locations also. Thank you. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this.
Okay, so I guess that's for me to get started. So I will preface how I grow things and with how I grow things and where I am located. So I'm about a quarter of a mile from the coast in Manhattan Beach. We get a lot of fog, and that becomes important in watering, as you know. I mostly grow only in pots, but recently did put a lot of plants in my yard in the ground. So I've become a little more experienced with that, but mostly everything I will tell you regards potted plants. And
I could use this. You can take that.
oh, not everybody's muted. Let's see if we can mute. Okay. Yeah, it's really hard for me to control muting. Okay. I'm going to mute everybody and see if this works. All right. Can you all see me? Just give a thumbs up. Okay. Thanks. All right. So that said, I use a cactus mixture, and I've recently changed, and I'm going to show you some photos of the mixture I use and why I've changed. But it's a cactus and succulent mix that I buy at the store. And the first one I used was the EB White cactus and succulent mix, and I've used that for years. However, on the last time I bought it, I found it to contain huge amounts of broken down wood and forest material. So I'm going to show you a photo of, let's see. So this is what I use. Can you see this? this is what I use now. This is what I used to use. This cactus and succulent mix, the UB stone. And this shows these large, this is 5/8, at least 5/8 pumice. And all of these large, I mean, this is about 3 inches, large pieces of wood. And that is just not conducive to growing succulents. So I went back to buying this, which is the Unigrow cactus mix. And this is a fairly blown up picture. So there are still smaller, this is about 1 inch. And these are back to being 3/8 pumice. And they're a lot smaller, or 3/16 pumice. So they're a lot smaller. And I'm gonna stop screen sharing. So I start with that. And to that I add about 1/3 pumice, that's the 3/16 size, or I will put in perlite. And before I do that, I moisten the perlite or the pumice. And I will say, when I'm using the perlite, I wear a mask because it is a respiratory irritant. And when I'm mixing large amounts of it, it will, has been known to cause respiratory problems. So anyway, I immediately put it in water first, and then I mix it. And I put all of this in a very big tub. To that, I add, and this can sound a little weird, but diatomaceous earth, and sort of a sprinkling, I guess what would be about a cup to 1/4 of a cubic foot of mixture. And this is, has been known to help with insects, and it's kind of a natural pesticide. And then to that, I will add either a little bit of diatomaceous earth or a little bit of sand or nothing, depending on what I'm potting. And I'll go into that as we go along. So when the pumice or perlite is moistened, it picks up more of the soil that you're mixing it with and less likely to rise to the surface of the pot after it's been in the pot for a long time. So as many of you probably noticed, your perlite or pumice rises up through your top dressing in your pots. And so by moistening it well and making sure it's got a coating of soil on it ahead of time, I try to avoid that. Doesn't always work, but I noticed that it does help blend in the soil much better. When I'm potting cacti, I use a little more pumice or perlite, and that's when I'll add the sand or DG, a little bit of DG, decomposed granite, not a lot. And again, maybe 2 cups in my big bin. And when I'm potting up things like echeveria or aloes, I'll add a lot less of those things, because for me, the more succulent things seem to need a lot more of a moister soil. I never pot in just pumice or perlite because I don't want to water that often. So for me, I always use some organics in it. Any questions on soil? Yes, M.A.
I didn't catch the word that you used for the product you put in to get rid of insects.
Oh, diatomaceous earth. It's a product they use in pools, and that's how I happen to have a whole bunch of it. And it doesn't get rid of insects, but it has insecticidal properties.
So where do you get that bag of soil and your diatomaceous earth?
You mean, where do I buy the soil?
I've never seen that bag before.
Unigrow is sold at H&H Nursery in Lawndale. And I know other places sell it, but that's where I get it.
This is a point of interest. The diatomaceous earth is what created the pit where South Coast Botanic Garden is, because we had a lens of diatomaceous deposit there, and that's what they took out in the 40s and 50s. And so it has a lot of local history. And it comes from diatoms, which we used to call algae, single-celled algae. And this single cell has a structure to its cell wall of silicon dioxide. So that's glass. And that's basically what diatomaceous earth is. It's silicon dioxide. And it is abrasive. And that abrasive quality is what scratches the cuticle of insects and actually can cause dehydration or drying out of the insect body just by mechanically moving past the diatomaceous earth. It actually abrades away the protective waxy cuticle and they dehydrate.
Thank you from our entomologist.
Well, and also if you
turn, biologist.
If you go up Hawthorne and you turn on Belmonte, that's where they had a big place where they dug for diatomaceous.
That was the mill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Butcher Hill. Butcher Hill's made of it.
Mm-hmm. And
you can
Anita can add something to that. Anita, you know about Butcher Hill and the diatomaceous mine. Why don't you share your background?
Well, my dad worked there as a process engineer, and in the 40s and 50s, in the 50s, I remember he called my mom and said, "Oh, come on up. We've run across some shark teeth." And wow. So we put our bandanas on our faces and went up and sifted through that white dusty stuff, found tons of shark teeth.
Oh, how cool.
You can buy it as
and you can poison. Yeah, you can buy the diatomaceous earth in a shaker bottle to shake onto your anthills
at most hardware stores.
Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah, the pool stores sell large amounts of it. So if you're going to use a lot of it, like I do, you can get a big box.
Yeah, it's a filter in the pools. It used to be used as the abrasive in toothpaste, but I talked to my dentist. He said they're now using pumice.
Oh God.
You mean I can take some of that pumice?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
That's why some people use toothpaste to polish their silver. We digressed. Okay.
That's okay. Okay. So now as for watering, I have two basic locations, and one is in the greenhouse, which gets watered way more often. And I would say in the summer, I water once a week. And what I water with is water with white vinegar to acidify it. 5 milliliters for every gallon. Think about that. No, I think it's 3 millimeter, no, I mean 15 cc's per gallon, which is like half an ounce per gallon. And that's because my pH is something like 8, my water pH. So it's very high. And that gets it down to anywhere between 5.5 and 6. And so that's what I'm going for in my water. And we've had pH testing kits, and that kind of is what works for us. And to that, I add a even fertilizer that's 20-20-20 during the growing season. And I add that, so I add about 1/4 of dilution. So whatever it says on the instructions as to how you are supposed to use the fertilizer, I use it 1/4 strength. And I use it every time I water, and I water every plant by hand. So it's a bit heavy on the work, but that's why I don't want to water so often. But in the winter, sometimes it'll go, my greenhouse will go 2-3 weeks without watering. I do water less in the summer. I soak a little more, but except for those plants that don't want to get it soaked, like the dormant ones in the summer. And that's what I do with my indoor plants, with my greenhouse plants. MA, you have a question?
I've heard we're supposed to water till it comes out the bottom of the pot. Is that enough? Because if I have much pumice in there, it runs through really fast.
Right, yeah.
Sufficient?
Well, I have dishes under all my plants. So in the greenhouse, always. So when it goes under the pot, it'll sit in the dish and ultimately dry out fairly quickly, but not so fast that the plant doesn't get good water. And because the soil I use holds on to water a little more, I don't think I water as heavy as you would if you had something that just came right out, like more of a pumice soil. So my outdoor plants up until June, from I guess December, November through June, get a lot of dew. I mean, the ground is wet here every morning. So you can imagine the plants are getting a lot of water. My outdoor plants are getting a lot of water, just moisture. So I water them maybe every 2 weeks. At this time of year, the dew isn't as heavy. And sometimes, but I still I would say I water my outdoor plants less often. And again, in the winter, they're obviously exposed to rain. When it rains, I don't water for at least 2 or 3 weeks afterwards. When it doesn't rain, again, every 2 weeks. In the winter, I take the dishes out so that when it rains, they don't sit in dishes. And at this time of year, I put them back in. So again, even though it's warm and the water goes right through, they've got some water to hold on to. And that's especially true for my dickeas in the summer. You want to really keep, they like a lot more water in the summer. Yes, Cliff.
Do you change the pH from indoors to your outdoors? Is there, or do you keep the same pH for both indoor and outdoor?
Yes. Yeah, it's the same formula for outdoor plants as well. May, you had another question?
I usually come up with questions, but I hope there are other people's questions too. When you talk about, we get a heavy dew or coastal eddy, whatever it is. So a lot of, if the plants get their leaves wet, I don't think the roots get wet. Can they get enough moisture through their leaves that it doesn't matter that the roots don't get much moisture?
Well, I don't know what you get, but we literally get water on the ground, kind of dew. I mean, that's what we get. You know, I'll go out and I'll go, gee, did it rain last night? No. You know, so there really is water. And, you know, obviously I look at the plants. So I found that if I water in addition to that, it rots the plants out in no time. So all I can tell you is that my plants are getting water down at their roots. And I water, when I do water, I don't water as heavily. You know, just really lightly. I don't care. I don't want to see it go through the plant even. And that seems to be enough in winter.
I think Copiapoas should do very well for you because that's the hallmark of the Chilean desert, is that a good deal of the water they get, those cactus, is coming from fog and condensation on the spines and just dripping off onto the soil.
That may be, but I grow mine in the greenhouse.
Yeah.
They will, I think, you know, I've tried them outdoors. They tend to rot. We still get more moisture than the Atacama Desert does. I know Gary probably has a different experience, but but he doesn't live, you know, in the kind of climate I live in.
Well, mine are outside. I have no greenhouse, so everything is outside. Right. They don't seem to rot at all. They're happy as clams, and they're just, you know, flowering away this summer. Anyway.
Yeah, mine are doing great too, and they're growing well. It's just what works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else I guess I should talk about where I situate plants. I have plants that want shade, getting partial sun during the day. I don't really have big trees to give them a lot of shade. It's kind of an open background. And I put plants that want a whole lot of shade, like my Sansevieria, Haworthias, under shade cloth, and heavy shade. My Sansevieria is under fairly heavy shade cloth. If they weren't, they'd get burned where I am. And that's how I grow those. I have some Sansevierias indoors, but mostly outdoors. Because when we're not here, it's so hot that they wilt inside. So unfortunately, I have to grow them outside, and so I have to grow them under shade. And the other microclimate thing you need to think about when you're deciding to plant a plant is what you're going to put it in. And so if I'm not going to show a plant, I basically have a choice of a cheap plastic pot or a terracotta pot. And I find that the plastic pots retain a lot more heat. So I'm not going to put a plant that doesn't want to get nice and warm in a plastic pot. I'll put it in a terracotta pot. Also, if it wants a lot more drainage, I'll put it in a terracotta pot. And I think those considerations are important as well when you're potting up a plant. That's about all I got, May. May?
I've been looking for shade cloth, and the only thing Home Depot has is heavy. And I've moved some plants from the shade to the sun. I finally put one of my chairs over one to shade it because I don't have old vinyl, old filmy curtains I can use. I'd like some suggestions on where I can.
MA,
All about the shade cloth.
Google greenhouse mega store.
Oh yeah, it's a great place.
And you can order I think 10%, 20%, 30%, up to 50% shading, any size, with borders on it, with grommets on it. I mean, the more you add onto the shade cloth and specific sizes, it gets a little more expensive, but you can get any kind that you want. That's if you recall the netting that I have over my big bench, that's where I got it from. And it's 10%.
I just want something I can cut into smaller squares.
You can get that too.
How do you want to cut it into smaller? I mean, how big an area are you looking for?
Individual plants that seem to be suffering.
If you want individual plants, try a dryer sheet. A dryer sheet works very well for individual plants. It sticks in the spines.
And what was the name of the greenhouse? What?
Mega store, MEGA store.
Thank you.
Do you want me to save my dryer sheets for you?
I think we've got some around here. Thank you.
Mike is up next. Oh, Ruth has a question. Otherwise, Mike's up next. Then we'll do Laurel, and then we'll do me.
Okay.
There's going to be some redundancy here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be considered to be on a panel of experts, and shocked, actually, to tell the honest truth. I'm not much of a show person, but I do a lot of propagation, and I spent several years in propagation at the Botanic Gardens, and where I learned from the likes of Dick Kohlschreiber and Jim Gardner. So I do, I produce a lot of, every time there's an offset from a plant, I'm going to pot it up, and I give a lot away. I even have sales once in a while. Can I share a screen? Is that possible? Looks like it. Good. Can we see that?
Nice picture.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So, yeah, where I live is actually probably halfway, my distance from the ocean is probably halfway between Maria and Laurel. And quite frankly, I mean, definitely last week, one time I was in my back garden, which is on the west side near the ocean. And it was quite cool, actually. I thought I might put an extra shirt on. I went round to the front garden and it was stinking hot. the marine, so I live right on the edge of where the marine layer is a lot of time. So that does create a lot of microclimates and difference in my yard. And as I say, my backyard faces west. Thing is that because we have an ocean view, I don't have a greenhouse or any shade cloth structures, because they would block my view across the valley to the ocean. So everything I grow is out in the full sun, except for I have some walls and some trees that when things are very young, I put them up against the wall so they don't get sun until the evening or something like that, so they get sun. I also like to do things on the cheap, keep a very tight budget. I don't show plants all that often because I don't have, nice fancy pots. I have about 3 good pots and I keep recycling the plants, moving them around every time there's a show. But that's it. I am very keen on being organic and not using any chemicals in the garden. I do believe that once in a nursery or a garden, once you can get a balance of good guys versus bad guys, that if you have enough good guys, they'll take care of the infestations. I will occasionally use, of course, rubbing alcohol on mealybugs. I mean, they're airborne and they can come in, or aphids even, But I draw maybe a bit of soap once in a while, but not very often. I draw the line at that. I make my own potting mix. I vary it according to what the plant is. As Maria pointed out, some more succulent plants, they like a little less drainage. I mean, for example, sempervivum doesn't need as much, as loose a mix as an agave will take quite a loose mix. Right. This is typical of what I use. I hope you can see the mouse on the top left there. I always put some a little bit of my own garden soil in to the mix, either stuff that's been used before in pots or stuff that I've dug out of the ground when I've planted something in the ground. And that's because I believe that there are beneficial microorganisms that are in the soil, that it's been there for a while and it's learned to cope with what bad guys there are in the area. So I think that keeps it going when you make a new pot. I buy bags of garden soil, and I like to use Kellogg because Kellogg is a local firm. They're patrons of the Botanic Garden. Kellogg actually gave truckloads of potting soil to propagation in the gardens. I mean, they were very generous. So I like to buy their stuff. This particular one, which is called organic garden soil, as Miriam pointed out, it does have a lot of sticks in. Kellogg's do have other mixtures that are less solid matter, more thing, but it's more broken up. But it's all forest floor material. So I mix my own garden soil and the bag of garden soil, and I put in fertilizer, and I use the Kellogg organic fertilizer, which is, I don't know what it is, a bone meal, feather meal, all mixed together, that kind of stuff. And some Osmocote or similar slow release fertilizer. I buy bags of pumice from BD White in, where are they now? Is it Gardena where they are now?
Gardena, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I also buy their, well, I've done this recently, been buying their bird's eye gravel, which is, it's even smaller than that 3/8 pumice. And it's got some small pieces in. So it's a good loosener, very good loosener of the soil. Has very little small particles in. So it doesn't clog the soil up as compared to my own garden soil, which can sort of clog the soil a bit. But in some ways, that's, if it's a bit clogged at the bottom, that means that the water's not going to run out quite as quickly. So it's a balance. You've got to keep the balance about right there, I'd say. There it is. Once it's mixed up, that's what it'll look like. And probably like a lot of other people in the hobby, that it took me several years to get away from the idea of overwatering and using too rich a mix like we would with non-succulents. It took me a long time to learn how loose a mix succulents really can handle, particularly some of them. Right, what do they cost? This is what I buy. The pumice comes in these big white bags. That's a 1 gallon pot next to it, so you can see the size of it. Same bag as the bird's eye gravel comes in the same bag, and it's $5 for a bag that size. It's very cheap, but I have to warn you, it's very heavy. Probably weighs, and depending on whether it's been raining or not, 50, 60 pounds. So you need somebody who can carry 50, 60 pounds to get some of that. The stuff on the right, it comes from Lowe's, locally Lowe's, the Kellogg garden soil in 3 cubic feet bales. So it's this big bag, and once again, that's heavy. It's hard for me to carry. The Organic Plus fertilizer from Lowe's as well, in smaller bags, and the Osmocote also. You've probably seen that in Lowe's. Good. In the picture on the right, these are some of my plants that are out in my back garden. And I have this very tall sweet fennel growing, which A, acts as a shade, and B, is a food plant for any swallowtail butterflies. The thing in winter, all the leaves are gone, so it's just a bunch of sticks, and the sun gets through and it dries the plants out nicely in winter. In summer, the leaves up and gives the plants quite a bit of shade. Now I have two different, very distinct areas where on my banks and on my garden outside, I have overhead sprinklers, and in my nursery at the back, I also have overhead sprinklers. And then I have an area on my patio where basically my good stuff is. I do hand water that, and I use, when I hand water, I use pH down to sometimes, not all the time, sometimes to balance the pH. It's very strong though. You can only use a tiny bit of pH down. pH down is used for swimming pools. So my sprinklers, they run twice a week, and I run them at 3 different start times, and they're only for like 2 to maximum 5 minutes per. So there's not much water, but it comes in three times an hour apart, which sort of, so it never really runs out the bottom of the plant. It's just sort of soaked into the soil. And it seems to be enough. In winter, I do something which most people don't do, and that is I allow weeds to grow in my pots. I have a lot of oxalis, Cape sorrel, Oxalis pes capri, sometimes known as Bermuda buttercup, and that grows profusely everywhere, but it only grows in the winter. It actually sucks a lot of moisture out of the pots. So if it's rained or something like that, they'll go crazy. They suck a lot of moisture out of the pots, and it doesn't seem to do the succulents or cacti any harm. So I let them happen. The trouble is you also get grass growing in there, which has got big old roots. So come the springtime, when it's time to get rid of them, I have to do a lot of repotting. It's very hard to pull grass out of a pot without disturbing the plant, without disturbing if there's any top dressing or anything. So I tend to repot when I get rid of those for the summer. And yeah, what did I write down? I wrote down here. Yeah, sometimes I do double potting, which is if you've got something in a plastic pot that's sitting in the sun, you've got something in a 1 gallon plastic pot, you can put that inside a 3 gallon plastic pot with an air gap in between, especially on the sunny side, and that keeps the 1 gallon pot a lot cooler. You need twice as many pots, of course, and that's just in summer.
That's a great tip, Mike. I like that.
So that's it. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you so much. That was great. Very interesting.
So everybody didn't fall asleep then?
No, we're all wide awake.
Question.
Those are good visuals.
How do I get a question in?
Just speak.
Oh,
go for it, Ruth.
Oh, okay. I'm new to all this technology, as well as all this information. Mike, great presentation. I kind of love your casual attitude, if I might say.
Okay.
I live probably maybe less than a quarter of a mile from Torrance Beach. I mean, it's walkable. I can walk down there when my knees are up to it.
In the Riviera?
In the Riviera, right?
Okay.
Cali Mayor.
All right.
and the lower part of Cali Mayor. And I have been really trying to conserve water usage. And I have my sprinklers set up, automatic sprinklers set up, maybe 2 times a month. But I run them 30 minutes on each zone.
Oh,
Because I have pure sand throughout my whole yard. It's practically, except whatever I've added over the years. I've been there 60 years, so. But basically, it's sand. I'm on a sand dune. So,
well, does your
but everything's thriving. Everything's thriving.
Yeah. Does your sprinkler controller have multiple starts? You know, you can start. Mine start at sort of 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and 3 a.m. So I run them 3 times when they run. And that way you that 30 minutes, you could cut it into 3 10-minutes, and then it'd be less likely to run off. It would sit there and then soak in. And once the first one's soaked in, the second one comes along, and it's a little easier for it to soak in because it soaks better into wet soil than it does into dry soil, especially sandy soil.
Well,
So,
I've got the sprinklers. They go on like 5 o'clock in the morning. All year round.
Maybe if your controller has the word starts on it, if you start times, and you can do multiple starts. So I think that's definitely beneficial.
Okay, good idea. Thank you.
By the way, I like to go for walks around your area. I love the views and the way the sea air comes through.
Oh, well, that's why we're there for 60 some odd years. We'll have to stop by sometime. That would be great.
Well, I tell you, I'm going to look you up in the look up your address in the database and go and have a look at your garden someday.
Yes, well, Laurel knows where I am too.
Yep. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Emma.
I have several. You talked about when you repot to get rid of the grass, there's the top dressing. Do you just toss your top dressing into the soil and keep using it in your pots?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Because I'm a cheapskate.
Sprinkler system in my pool garden. I run it for 10 minutes.
You've gone on to mute.
You're mute.
I let go of my space bar, sorry. It seems like it moistens about this far down. I don't know if I should, I don't think the water gets down to the roots where it really needs to be. So do I need to run it 20 minutes?
Well, it's flat there, isn't it, in your backyard?
Absolutely. This is in the old pool.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of it. Yeah, yeah.
And it just there's a lot of, I added stuff to the compacted soil that was there. I've got a lot of pumice and cactus and succulent soil in there. My plants are in there. And so often, shortly after I've watered, this far down, it's dry. And I guess, should I go for 20 minutes?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's got to soak in a fair bit. Yeah. If it's flat and it doesn't run off, then, I mean, yeah, you don't have to do the multiple starts. If you've got a slope, I mean, that's where you really need to worry about that.
And one last question. Whoever's growing Dudleyas, I was just doing some homework and I got a brand new, beautiful Dudleya, and it says don't water in the summer at all.
Right.
Wrong, MA.
No, yeah, I don't. I water mine lightly.
Yeah.
Dudley, if it's, go ahead.
Interesting.
Dudleya pulverulenta is probably the most finicky about being watered in the summertime. but I probably have 15 to almost 20 different, probably 20 different kinds of Dudleys. And I water all of mine. The key to raising a Dudley is keep the roots cool. So use Mike's suggestion of putting your pot inside of another pot, or putting a rock in front of the, between the sun and the pot, or a piece of artware or anything that'll shade the pot, okay? Even a tall cactus will help. So keep the roots cool and then water it just enough to keep the, don't water it. I'll get into my presentation, but don't water it in real hot or real cold. Well, cold weather, they grow in our winter times there, but much over about 90 degrees, I wouldn't water them as when the temperatures are real high like that. They just won't absorb it. Most cactus and succulents go dormant at that point. So no need to, a lot of people think, oh, you got to water more because they're using up more because of the hot weather. Wrong. They're built to withstand drought conditions. And so they go dormant and they don't absorb the moisture. And so you'll just rot them off in that case. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have Dudley and they're right at the very limit of my sprinklers, right on the edge.
Mike, that was great. I had one more, but I can't remember what it was. So I'll.
Cliff has one.
Cliff does.
Hey, Mike, you mentioned adding fertilizer when you repot and stuff like that. Do you have a formula that you use for how much fertilizer goes into what size pot?
Well, no, but I only use those fertilizers I showed. And what I'll do is I'll get that organic fertilizer and soak it in water for quite a while. And it sort of makes a sort of mush. It's not really what you would call liquid, it's more of a mush. But then I'll put that into a watering can and swill it around. So, I mean, really, I have no idea how strong it is or how much I'm putting in. But it's very benign. It's not a strong chemical or anything. So I don't think there's any problem with putting too much in or
you won't burn the roots or anything.
Right. And then I'll maybe sprinkle a little bit of Osmocote on top. And then maybe cover that with top dressing or whatever. Yeah, hopefully when it waters, the Osmocote will get wet and it'll, because they cool. Take what, 100 days or something like that before they start to release. So the organic fertilizer works first, and then that'll cut in later to make it last longer.
Wow. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, looks like I'm done.
Okay, I guess I'm next.
Yes.
Okay. I live just a little further inland than Mike, and of course also Ruth. I'm right across from South High School. I'm looking at it right now as I look out the window. And it is basically open. There's some tree growth along the back wall of the property. And everything I have is in pots. It's entirely a container garden. So one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and I'll just throw this in while I'm still thinking about it, is I tend to move some of my plants according to the season. There are some plants that need more sun in the winter time, and I'll move them into sunnier spots. And there are some that really don't want to be in full sun in the middle of summer. So I have kind of a mobile garden where my plants are getting shifted around according to the seasons. And so I pay attention to how my plants look. Of course, I grow hard. I tend not to overwater. And so that means they have a hard look, as we used to describe it, or a more natural looking growth form. They're not all pumped up and, fat and happy looking. They're kind of like they've been out in the desert. So that's kind of my strategy. So anyway, it's a container garden entirely. And I tend to have a very simple philosophy of soil mix. I like to get the the Kellogg's cactus, and they call it palm. Kind of an odd combination, but anyway, that's how they're marketing the Kellogg's soil mix. I've been getting that and mixing like a 50-50 of the soil plus sponge rock or perlite. I do have pumice, but it tends to be heavier, and I favor a lighter soil mix. And as Maria pointed out, it is potentially harmful to the lining of the trachea and lungs. So I always wet it down. So I just take the hose and just run the hose right into the bag and just, you know, essentially get the dust to settle completely. And then I pour it into a large trash barrel, and then I have a kind of a damp mix of perlite in the beginning. So it goes in 50-50 is my general rule of thumb. And if I have something that I know is really subject to rot, it's really sensitive to overwatering, I will just simply add more sponge rock. If it's something like an epiphyllum that I know loves more organics, then I will put in less sponge rock. So I'm kind of like a cook. It's a pinch of this and a pinch of that. And it's basically in my head, and I don't quantify anything. So just the basic rule of thumb I always start with is 50-50. And I put granular fertilizer in if it's a whole new potting with new display pots, and I'm thinking about this as a show plant. I'll put in some granular fertilizer. And what I use is an azalea or rhododendron fertilizer mix. Comes in bags, and it's like a crushed mix of stuff. And my theory is that helps to counteract the hard water that we all have. These are acid-loving plants, azaleas and rhododendrons. They often have chelates and other minerals associated with them that also help. And I found that that is a fairly satisfactory way of getting around using vinegar in the water. And I'm all for simplifying my life. I don't have a lot of extra time, and this is how I kind of cope with it. I hand water with a hose most of the time, overhead watering. For my dickeas, they do, as Maria pointed out, require more water in the summer. They may look like an agave, but they certainly are water loving. So saucers go under all my dickeas in the summertime, and then that gives them a little extra, so they can sop up or soak up the water from the dish. Let's see what else I wanted to add. Oh, I do use top dressing, mostly just to keep the soil from washing out when I overhead water. That tends to be a problem if you put your display top dressing down like you'd have in a show. When you overhead water, sometimes you can sort of shift it to the back of the pot. You're watering from one direction all the time. So I've used just plain pea gravel in the past, just any really priced rock material, crushed rock, just to keep the soil from splashing out. I try not to use insecticides, as does Mike. Once in a while, I do have to do it, but I do it very controlled. And I use Bayer, which is, not friendly. It's, as somebody described it at Armstrong Gardens, it's like the atomic bomb trying to control your insects. But there are some that love to get in the cracks and crevices of haworthias and things like that. And it's practically impossible to get in there with a Q-tip and alcohol to get them out. So I have been known to use Bayer, but I use it very tiny bit, just sort of dribbling it over the plant in question, not a wholesale spraying. I do have biological control in my yard. I have several fence lizards that patrol the backyard. And I've noticed the spider population is much reduced, and including crickets and other things that might be in the yard. So I'm really happy to see the fence lizards taking occupancy of my yard, and they keep me company during COVID too. With respect to watering, summertime, it's once a week, and I've taken to putting it on the calendar because I don't trust my memory as to when I last watered. And I have different areas that need watering, so that all gets, recorded on the calendar. Then if there's any question, I just look at the calendar and say, oh, it is time to water again. However, I have used another technique, and that's what I call an indicator plant. There's a couple of plants in my yard that when the water level gets low, they let me know, and their leaves start to droop. And so when I see my my vine starting to droop, I know it's definitely time to look at the calendar and consider watering. So it's a cryptostegia that I have in the yard, and it's just like clockwork. It lets me know when things are drying out. The other indicator is that you may have some weeds that are wilting, and that's a good indicator it's time to water too. So even the weeds will dry out. And yes, Mike, I have weeds, but it's not just in the winter, it's a constant battle. So for watering in the winter time, I try very hard not to water late in the day. I always water early in the morning. And the reason is I want all of the vegetative portions to completely dry out before nightfall, because our temperatures do drop in the winter, and there are a lot of soil fungi that are really happy in the wintertime when it's damp, and they can literally kill your plant off. So I do in the winter, early morning watering. In the summer, like right now, I will tend to water in the late afternoon. That means that the plants are soaking up moisture all night without any stress as the temperatures are dropping during the night. And so I found that that is another good strategy to use, is pay attention to when you water as well. Most people don't really water carefully. They will just pass the hose over the pot once and then go on someplace else. I go back over it 3 or 4 times and try to fill up the water to the top of the edge of the pot so I can actually see it pooling there, and then it will drain down through the soil column. And you can take a look just after you've watered, go knock out a pot or two and see how far water that has gone, managed to get through into the pot, into the soil. So I think, MA, that might answer your question about that. When I watch people watering, in my mind, they don't really water properly. They just pass maybe once or twice over the plant with the water, and then they go on, don't go back.
Right.
To me, I go back all the time. I will repeat watering, and that way I know that it's gotten through the water column into the soil. So I do have some plants that are winter growing, and I have a lot of summer growing plants. And therein lies another strategy. There's a lot going on in the yard that has to be watched. And so in the summertime, I have plants that are deciduous, they're bulbs, they're pelargoniums. And so I have dedicated several shelves I call the dry shelves. And during the summer, I never water those plants. They are totally dry. And generally in September, I start spritzing them and start slowly getting them accustomed to some moisture coming into the soil. So for those of you that grow lachanellias and other like ornithogalums, a lot of the interesting bulbs, winter growing geophytes as they're called, and some of the pelargoniums from South Africa, you need to have a place where you just don't tend to water so much or at all in the summertime. So that is another part of my strategy. I have quite a mixed collection of plants, so I have to make these adjustments. I also have bromeliads. They're all snuggied up against the coolest, dampest part of the garden I can find. And they do get morning sun, but after 10, 11 o'clock, they get no sun at all. So, and they're doing fine. I have tillandsias. They, of course, have trichomes on their leaves. They're little sponges that take the moisture right out of the air. And I actually hand water those when I water my plants. So the tillandsias all get a drink from the hose as well. And they seem to be doing just fine. I have great luck with tillandsias in the yard. Okay, Emmy, you have a question?
How often do you water your tillandsias? I just got a ton of tillandsias from Nels.
Once a week.
He told me just to keep water in the cone, in the heart.
Well, that's not a tillandsia.
I mean bromeliad, sorry.
Yeah, once a week for the bromeliads, yes.
That's enough in this hot, dry.
And I will often just take the hose and flush out the tanks in the center. I've never had trouble with mosquitoes, but in habitat, there are mosquitoes that do breed in those tanks, but we don't seem to have them here yet. But I am cognizant of that, so I actually blast out all the tanks when I'm watering. So any mosquito larvae that might be in there or egg rafts, they're blasted out and they'll die. But some people don't even want to grow don't want to go bromeliads like neurogelias and acmeas and varesias because they're concerned about mosquitoes. I've never found that to be a problem.
That's very good to know. I had two others. I've never heard the term sponge rock.
It's the same thing as perlite.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on using neem oil for pests?
I've never really used it. I think maybe Mike has got experience with that, or Sally had experience with it, I think, in the propagation. Are you still there, Sally?
Yes, I'm here. I used it on scale on my cactus and succulents, and it helps suffocate them. You know, you have to wash them off. I use toothpicks and use the edge of a toothpick and scrape them off if they're not too embedded, but neem oil does help with that.
Mm-hmm. Have you tried Safer Soap?
I do try it. It sort of works on the juvenile ones.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of patience and a lot of just hand wiping and getting down in there with small pointy objects and not piercing the skin. That's another thing I try not to do.
Right.
I use neem oil, and Haworthias are fairly responsive to it for scale. I tried it on Echeverias. They don't like it. So that kind of leafy succulent, I would not use it on because it just doesn't like it. And I know I've talked to Jim Gardner. He's used it on Echeverias, but I think he's used a more dilute solution.
Yeah,
you really don't want to use neem oil when the temperature is above about 90.
Right.
And you want to not expose the plant to sun.
Right.
After you've used it. So if you're using it in your fixed garden, well, I probably wouldn't use it in a fixed garden.
Yeah.
But if you used it in a non-sunny day, or maybe covered the plant, that's where you could use the sheet drying towel or cover the plant after you use it. So it's
a lot of times I bring mine inside after doing it for a day or two.
Yeah, I just bring it to a very shady part that I don't usually put plants, but I call it my recovery area. And after I've used neem oil.
It's your plant hospital.
Yeah.
Is that because they burn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the oil. Go ahead, Gary, you were gonna answer that.
Yeah, I was going to say for MA, alcohol really works best for mealybugs and aphids and things that way that have soft bodies because they breathe through their skin. Scale has that like a snail shell around them. And so anytime you put alcohol or water, it just runs off of them, and they're still sucking the plant juice from underneath that shell. So to kind of seal up that and suffocate them, the neem oil forms, an oily seal around it, and that'll eventually get them. So neem oil, I find, is better for scale type insects.
Jim, what do you use?
Yep.
Me?
One things I do.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm here. I just joined a few minutes ago. I hate to say it, but I mostly just use Bayer, and I don't use very much. A lot of these pests are tended by ants, and what I've often found helps is just to submerge the whole pot in water and let it soak for a while and just drive the ants out, and then add a little bit of Bayer, and that sometimes works. The other thing I do with scale is, although it's tedious, I just take a squirt bottle and literally blast them off. It's tedious, but it does get them.
Do you use a surfactant when you're using that? Like a soap solution?
It would make sense, but no, I haven't. But sometimes when I'm using Bayer, I will use literally just some dish soap with that. I haven't had trouble with burning, but I usually have it indoors when I'm doing it, or in the greenhouse. And gosh, I really don't do this very much, but sometimes you're just driven to it.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, I had an infestation of the cactus fly. Is that what it is, Laurel?
Yeah,
And you can't see it. What happens is it lays its eggs and the larvae eats out the whole interior of your little cactus in the pot. And until it turns brown, you don't even know it. So I had started putting some Bayer granules on top of most of my little cactus in pots in order to keep that fly out. I haven't had them this year.
Yeah.
But I must have had 15 cacti die, and I never knew that they had that larva. I broke one open, and there was this ugly worm inside of it.
Yeah, it's like a maggot.
The whole interior. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a maggot. Yeah, you have a lot of puntia on your side of the hill, and it's just naturally there, and that's where the flies, normally make. But if they stumble across, on your balcony, a really nice, yummy cactus, they'll lay an egg on it. So, yeah, it's living where the cactus fly hangs out. It's a big black syrphid fly with transparent wings. It's an atypical looking hoverfly. Doesn't have the black and yellow bands that we generally associate with hoverflies. It's big.
I haven't seen it. Boy, I'll get out there with my fly swatter if I can find one.
I never heard anybody talk about cactus fly before.
No, you haven't hung around me long enough, that's all.
I'll work on it.
Okay. All right, well, any other, I don't know if I've covered everything. Let me think. Did the watering, well, I do want to comment. Sometimes if we let the soil dry out and we have a lot of organic mix in the soil, and we let the root ball basically dry, when we go to water, what typically happens is the water goes around the root ball, down the inside of the pot and out the drain hole, and it doesn't really get into the interior of the soil. Yep. So Jim's comment about putting it in a bucket and just dunking it to get rid of ants certainly is work. I've done that myself many times. But the other thing is, if you do have a root ball that's totally dried like that, It happens mostly when you have a lot of peat in the soil. Just let it sit overnight in a bucket of water, and it will finally work its way into that root ball, and you'll be back to normal. Anybody have any other questions?
All right, Gary.
Okay, we're well over an hour for this presentation, so I'll try to be short. Let me start with my soil mixture first. I use 1/3 pumice, 1/3 sand, and 1/3 compost or topsoil. The pumice is same as I think everybody else uses, about 3/8 inch pumice. The compost and topsoil, I actually 10 years ago when I moved in here, I trimmed the trees in the backyard. They wanted to haul it away. I said, no, blow it over against the fence because I thought I'd use it for paths, but I haven't got to all of that yet. And so it has rotted. And so it is more termite dirt than anything else, I think. But it's just all composted away. Lately I've been using that. I used to use topsoil that I get from Home Depot, but again, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The only thing I do separate is area carpus. Sometimes I'll add some pea gravel to make it a little bit looser. And occasionally if it's laurel, I'll add a little bit more pumice on something that is subject to overwatering. While I'm on the specifics of things, there are some dark skin Neoporteras. The ones with the purple skin seem to not like nitrogen in their fertilizer very much, or they don't like organic mix. That somehow tends to cause them to rot off. Or if you try to grow scleral cactus, they don't like organics in their soil mixes. But otherwise, I mix it up in a garbage can, and I roll a garbage can around in a circle to mix it up like a cement mixer, and I just put a board on top of the trash can when I want a pot, and I fill it up, and what falls out falls back in the trash can. So that's my method and I use the same soil mix for Haworthias as I do for everything else, and mostly the cactus. Now let me get to the watering schedule, and let me footstep this twice, if not more. My philosophy is you need to marry, and I use the word marry, your watering schedule with your soil mix with the environment. I live probably 5 miles to the west. I mean, yeah, the ocean is about 8 to 10 miles to the west and maybe 4 to 5 miles to the south. So I'm probably the furthest inland of anybody. But let me give you some examples of what I mean by marrying your watering schedule with your soil mix and the environment. I have a friend on Instagram that lives in Panama. He has his whole, he wanted to start a cactus nursery down there. And he bought quite a few cactus from me that I shipped via Miami so I didn't have to export. They worked out the export between his relative and him. But he had a greenhouse. He says, Gary, it rains here about every other day and it's hot and humid all the time. So I built a greenhouse to protect the plants. And he says, what potting mix? I said, it was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And he says, he used almost all pumice, no sand, because he needs, and it made sense when he said what he was using, because he needs a soil mixture that is very well drained because it stays hot and moist all the time. It's a very high humidity. He doesn't have to worry about moisture at all. Similarly, I have a friend that likes to water her plants about twice a week. And, you know, if you're going to water that often, you need to have a better draining soil mixture. Another example is C&J is one of the world's largest seed growers, and they sell wholesale, and I buy a bunch of plants from them. They pot things in almost totally pure pumice, but for a different reason. They ship plants all over the United States and a lot of them to foreign countries. They don't want to have to pay the shipping weight. When they ship it to Home Depot or Lowe's in Indiana, they don't want to pay the shipping costs of shipping sand that far. What's the lightest weight? It's pumice. On the other hand, they have to pay the higher watering bill because they got to water more often, but they pay less shipping costs. So if you go to a box store and you get a pot that's very light, you need to come home, put it into your soil mixture so that it meshes up with your watering schedule. So the environment plays a role. I'm farther inland. I'm a little more drier than everybody else. And so I've lived a lot of different places. I was in the military for 20 years. I'm getting to me on my example here. I use more sand in my mixture. That's where the one-third pumice, one-third sand, one-third compost comes from. I got started with that because I only was able to play with my hobby when I had a full-time job on the weekends. I needed a soil mixture that held the moisture until the weekend. I didn't have time to go out. In fact, sometimes I didn't even go out and look at my hobby during the week, if I, especially in the wintertime when I went to work in the dark and came home in dark. So, I only watered things on the weekend. I needed a soil mix that held the moisture longer. So that's why I started adding more sand, and I've kept at it. And it has been something, and I still only water every 7 to 10 days here in Long Beach. So I'll stomp it again. I think, in my opinion, you need to marry your watering schedule with your soil mixture and your environment. I mean, if you like to water more often, you adjust your soil mixture accordingly. If you don't want to water as often, you put more sand in to hold the moisture more. And then it depends upon how far inland you live in terms of what your microclimate is. So, okay, off of that soapbox. Yes, I will water almost every time and add some soap. I lower the pH. I use pH down. I used to use tri-vinegar, but it takes me, when I water everything, probably 40 or 50 gallons. So that begins to use up a bunch of vinegar. pH down, I think it's about a half a teaspoon per 10 gallons of water. So it goes a long ways, as Mike said. The plants in pots I water every 7 to 10 days, and most of them set outdoors. Only things that are in the greenhouse are usually seedlings, a few show plants that I want to protect from the elements, or things that euphorbias that probably may not, that may be cold sensitive to our coldness here. I tell people when they visit my yard, don't water cactus and succulents typically when it's below about 40 or above about 90 or 95. That plants, both cactus and succulents, seem to go dormant then, and when they go dormant, they're not going to absorb the moisture out of the ground, and they're susceptible to rotting off. Another quip, we have run the Plant of the Year contest, and we've sent out questionnaires, and every year most of the people appears in the club water 7 to 10 days, but there's a couple people only water once a month, and a few people water more often. The people that water, say once a month, you need to be careful, in my opinion, that as Laurel said, when a plant is dormant and you haven't watered it for a while, you need to be kind of careful about encouraging those hairline roots to get started again. And so you have to mist it a little bit and baby it along to get it to grow roots again. So to avoid that, kind of babying, and I don't have time for that. I just water everything and try to keep the roots from drying out. And that's my advice to MA. Yes, water your Dudleys a little bit just to keep the roots from drying. A lot of people say, no, you can't water Dudleys in the summertime. I water all of my Dudleys all year round. Any other questions? I think I've said most of what I was going to say.
Question.
Yes, Corey.
Hey, Gary, you or when anybody else is using pH down, how are you guys, do you have a proportioner, or how are you doing that on such a large scale with as many plants as you have?
I have a little container that fits on the end of a garden hose that you can put fertilizer or any kind of fungicide, insecticide, or whatever.
Is it like this? Like a hose end proportioner?
No, I have it's like a little it's probably about a pint little jar that screws on the end of a hose that has a little trigger that you can turn on and off, and you can fill the little pint container with whatever you want and proportion that you want. I put a teaspoon of, I think it's a half a teaspoon of pH down in that container, fill it up with water. I put a squirt of about a tablespoon of dish soap in there. Fertilizer, I didn't talk about that, but I put the fertilizer in there, and then I just water everything with that.
Do you have to like use a certain pressure, a high enough pressure to actually get it to proportion correctly? Because I ask because the issue I'm having with this is if you don't have it on full blast, it won't uptake at the 20-to-1 ratio that it's rated at. And at the same time, you're gonna want to blast all the plants when you're watering them.
I understand where you're coming from. The one I use, I got, and Jade may remember the nursery. It's the one that runs on a street. It's about a mile south of El Segundo, right next to the 101, whatever street that street is, right, that parallels 110 right there. Oh, it begins with a name. I can't think of it's a Japanese type name. I can't think of the name. That's where I got it. But I don't think it is exactly the same monitoring, but it's pretty close. I mean, whether I hold the trigger halfway or full way, I seem to use about the same amount of water covering the same amount of area.
Okay.
I'm sure that if I go, just barely a dribble, it probably doesn't uptake as much. Okay. The fertilizer, I used to use just plain Miracle Grow until I read on the box that it is like 22% nitrogen and less than 10% on the other two things. I said, gee, the first number grows, the second number is flowers, and the third number is roots and fruit, which I have continued to use for growing seedlings and for anything I want to grow bigger. But I've switched to a fertilizer that I get at Orange County Agricultural Supply. It's called Grow More, and you can find it on the internet. It's Grow More. It's 6-30-30. So it's low on nitrogen, but high on flowers and high on the roots and fruit. And I think I have gotten a lot more flowers this year than I have in previous years. And I put that in that same container. Back to the fertilizer, I never use, and I use it about half strength on that granular fertilizer. Yes, it'll clog up the end of that little sprayer if I use it, try to use it full strength, but half strength, it seems to suck it through okay.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So Gary, you forgot to say, you taught me how to use the pH down, and you said how important it was to get a pH testing kit.
Yes.
The liquid kind, because pH down is so strong that you can easily overdo it.
Right.
So I mean, do a test and make a mix and test the pH.
Yeah, I always test. Well, I usually test it once, just to make sure that the city hasn't changed things before when I water. I don't test every filling of my container. I'll do it like once when I start in the day, and then I'll fill it up, 4 or 5 times after that. The contraption I'm talking about, as you don't pull the trigger as much for a weaker stream, it doesn't uptake as much. So you're not going to overdose. The only time you'd overdose is when the trigger is full on, and that's when I test it to see what the pH is. Does that make sense? Everybody's muted.
Gary, is the contraption you're describing something like the Miracle Grow sprayer?
It looks like that without the big bulbous nose on the end, but it's that same kind of canister, and it has a little tube that goes down and sucks it off the bottom.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Let Maria know if you liked today's topic or not, and if there's other topics that you would like to, that we might be able to put together similar to this.
Okay. This was superb. I can't hardly tell you how many notes I took and how much I learned, and I can't wait to get to my garden and start.
I think, MA, another thing is the time. I didn't mention this, but I wanted to underscore it because Laurel did mention it, is the watering time. Watering your summer watering late in the day, and that your plants won't dry out as much if you water it early in the day. So that's another strategy.
And we didn't talk about the CAM today, which is a whole nother conversation, but
yeah, this
early
is
in the morning or late at night is good for that. That's something I actually know.
Yeah, but I think, we around here, we never water in the summer during the day. It's always late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's another key. And then in the winter earlier. So
I have a couple of tips. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you found that. I don't do that either. And I have found sometimes when somebody has watered and gets water on leaves, that the sun will magnify that little droplet and sometimes burn the leaves on the succulents. So I tend not to do it in the sunshine for that reason too.
So I was going to come up with a tip for maybe Ruth and MA about getting stuff to soak into your soil. I mean, the idea of, I forget what they call them now. Gary built one where you could actually take tiles, and I just looked at your garden, Ruth, on Google Street View, and it's very steep, isn't it? It's like 45 degrees out the front there, and it's very sandy. So if you got some old tiles or something, or cheap tiles, and you put them in, bang them into the ground so that they would actually catch any water that was running down, and then the water would run down in. Or, and maybe for MA, if you got some plastic tubing, just a little length of plastic tubing, and hammered that into the ground and filled it with gravel, and then maybe put a little thin layer of gravel over the top or something. When you watered, the water would easily go down through the gravel and get down to the root area.
They used to sell a product called Water In, which I think was nothing more or less than palm olive soap. And you actually would mix that, and then you could put your water fertilizer in as well, and then just hose it onto your lawn. I've taken to taking my shower water when I'm doing my showering, and I'm trying to save water, so it goes into a bucket, which I then carry out the front door. And I know there's some soap in that water, and so I've been putting it onto a pomegranate near the front door. And that pomegranate is the biggest I've ever seen it. It's so happy looking. And I think it's because it's probably getting the equivalent of water in. It's just basically, you know, soap. It's the extra soap from showering. And there is something it's called a surfactant. You want something that will penetrate that barrier and get the water to soak in better. And sometimes when we let our soil dry out, then it's kind of hard to get it started again to absorb. Now, when it's loose and has a lot of sponge rock or perlite in it or pumice, that tends to help it to move down the soil column a little more easily. So that's another advantage to having a very loose mix. But if you have a loose mix, then you need to fertilize more often. And that's the downside of having like the C&J with nursery. You know, I'm sure they fertilize every time they water. And Gary probably knows about that.
When my pots get hard like that, I take a
probe.
When you go Japanese, you're using
tweezers,
chopsticks.
That'll work. Yeah.
Poke chopstick holes in to break it up.
That will work. Yes. And another thing I wanted to mention, Gary was talking about watering Dudleyias in the summer. I also water my aeoniums in the summer. Even though they're dormant, they get a shot of water along with everything else. I don't water them heavily, but I do water them. And the root balls are really, they get quite massive when you have in containers. And that's why it's important to repot them periodically.
Let me say, yeah, a lot of plants like Dudleyas and aeoniums go dormant in the hot weather like this. Watering them, I water them as well, but maybe not as much as other plants. But I mean, you want to keep their roots from dying.
Right.
Just because the plant is not growing doesn't mean you don't want to keep that it doesn't, the plant doesn't need moisture to keep the roots turgid.
Mm-hmm.
It will gradually sap the roots out of the whole plant to try to maintain its life. So you just want to give it enough water to keep the roots so that it can get a jump start in the fall when it gets ready to grow.
Mm-hmm.
A quick comment to MA on the CAM. I bet, did you know that cactus for the first 9 to 12 months, according to my observations and a little bit of what I've read, don't do CAM. They photosynthesize during the day, and it's somewhere between about 9 and 12 months, and they swap over to at nighttime. That's when I lose most of my seedlings, is about between the 9 and 12 month mark, when they want to, they appear to swap over, and I watered them too much at the wrong time.
Yeah, I think the kalanchoes are able to alternate back and forth. So when it's really, there's lots of water, they go off of CAM. When the water is, not there, they go onto CAM. So there are some plants that really can flop back and forth. They're not strictly CAM plants.
Including sedum. See, a lot of sedum, I believe, do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can grow in quite wet conditions.
Yeah.
So I have, if one thing I would like to add very quickly is that I've had quite a lot of success at propagating from leaves, like from Echeveria or those plants that will grow roots from the leaves. And what I do is I get a bowl, one of those plastic hanging bowls, and I put regular potting soil in there, my regular mix in there. And then I put just like ½ an inch of sand on top of it, and then just put the leaves on the sand. Mm-hmm. So they can sense them. I mean, and that's under my sprinklers, so that it'll sink through the sand. When I say sand, I mean silver sand, very, very quick draining sand. It'll remain dry on the top so the leaves don't rot, but they know that there's water down below, so they're going to send their roots down to to try and find the water. And it seems to work very well.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of success that way.
Gary, you were asking for suggestions for future programs, maybe. Does anybody else have challenge keeping clear which are summer growers and which are winter growers?
We do have a list published of that. And I always have to refer to that list myself. So I think we have it on the website, don't we?
Yes, we do. It was originally came from, who was it? Highland Growers, I believe, which was a nursery, I don't know where, which I think they've closed by now. And Bill Wilk came in with a lot of suggestions, and various members have added to it. So the one we've got is a little unique. Nobody else has got the same one. I hope it's accurate. I mean, if anybody wants to add to it or correct it, that's good. But it's on the website.
I don't remember. It was Tom Glavich.
Is it on links?
Under the links page, yes, it is.
Okay, so MA, if you go to the links page, you'll see it there. And what I do is I print it up so I have it to look at, and I don't have to go running to the computer and,
I can certainly do that, but it was either Tom Glavich or Tim Harvey. Somebody was saying, all those lists are just garbage, which undermined my confidence. And the list that we give out at the CSSA table whenever there's a show that lists the summer and the winter growers, I'll check ours. It's probably the most accurate out there then. What say you?
Sun Warrior.
It's like finding out whether the things are poisonous or not. I mean, they'll say kalanchoe, yes, they're poisonous. Well, it's not all kalanchoe. And I mean, if you're just going to put the genus into a list, I mean,
that's not good, no.
You really should put every different species within the genus and say whether that's winter or summer. And that's a huge job. So that's why it's never going to be completely accurate.
Yeah, there are some aloes that are summer growers, some that are winter growers, for example.
There's some aloes that are poisonous too.
Really?
You don't want to I think Duke Benedon put out a list of poisonous aloes.
Oh.
Because everybody assumes because aloe vera can be ingested that it's true of all aloes, it's not. So be very cautious about anything you put in your body.
All right. That was a great presentation, everybody. Thanks for all the comments and all the questions.
Thumbs up, thumbs up.
All right, next we have our plant of the month. So these are the photos that have been sent in.
Oh, Maria, I didn't manage to get the link for the recording. Nobody sent email and it's not on the page.
Okay, let me stop sharing. Hold on. Let's see. No, the recording is going to be on iCloud and Scott will give it to you because he couldn't be here to actually physically do it. So that was the deal with the recording.
So that's just for Apple people then?
No, he's gonna put it on the YouTube and send the link so you can put it.
So later then, all right, okay.
Yeah, thanks. All right, let's find the PowerPoint. Slideshow. Okay, here's our Cactus and Succulent Society July plants. First, the garden and brag plants, and our very first is my hubby, Bernard Johnson, with this beautiful Mammillaria spinosissima. Cliff and Sue Wong, a Gymnocalycium. Cliff, I didn't know whether it was you and Sue or just you, so correct me if I...
No, that's okay.
Both of you credit. Okay, going back, he started growing this from a single leaf. It's 3 years old. I think that's beautiful.
Came off of the free table.
It wanted the view. I think that was the
Beautiful.
This was labeled Echinopsis pachanoi. We think it's some kind of Trichocereus, but the flowers are gorgeous.
Every year it blooms. It's so beautiful. This year we have about 20 little sort of buds on there. Last year we had 4. So it just continues to multiply.
It's gonna be a show every week. This is Jim Gardner's Echeverria Domingo. I think that's your pot too. Another Jim Gardner plant and pot. Cedar cactus hybrid. This is gorgeous. Mammillaria spina. Tylocolin wallichii. This is Joe Tillotson's garden, Echium. Another Joe Tillotson epiphyllum. Joe's Gymnocalycium. Laurel Woodley's garden, Asclepius Kurasavakia. Kurasavakia, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ipomea purpurea, I got that one right. And her Tillandsia, Straminea. And here's her bromeliad, a Freesia red chestnut.
Red chestnut.
How gorgeous that is.
Wow.
I like the way you caught the sun to it. And Mike Short, Echeverria Cante. And a Aloe Dorothea flowering. That's pretty special. And a big super bloomer from Phyllis Dispenza. And another gorgeous bloom from Terry Straub of Parodia Rosolutia. Thank you all for sharing your gardens. Now we get to our novice Sansevieria. Whoops. Fernwood Mikado by Jim Tanner. And Sansevieria Hallei by Jim Tanner. Now you're gonna see some Hallei by the rest of us. This really takes the cake. It's huge. Labivia Novice, we have Labivia saltensis by Terry Straub and Russ Bridger. And another Labivia species by Terry Straub. Succulents, intermediate, Sansevieria Dracaena. This is Dracaena. So just a preamble here. A lot of the Sansevierias were put into Dracaena. So I'm not sure we dealt with that in the Plant of the Month verbiage, but the Trifasciata group has been put into Dracaena. So everyone who sent me something that was Trifasciata, we're now going to label it Dracaena. And this is a Futura superba. So what I love about some of these clones or cultivars are where the yellow is on the Trifasciata. In this case, the yellow is on the rim, and you'll see some that have the variegation in other places. Another Trifasciata by Mike Short. Sansevieria Kirky, Silver Blue by Bernard Johnson. And a Trifasciata by Anita Kaplan. Lobivia, only one, Lobivia saltensis by Anita Kaplan. Great photograph. Got a lot of open ones, so we'll go right to it. Sansevieria Ebby by Sally. It's very artistic. Sansevieria Green. I think this is a honeyi type Trifasciata, but she just called it green, so I'm really not sure what it is. Cylindrica by Bill Wilk. Cylindrica by Phyllis DiCrescenzo, less mature. A lot of pups. A cylindrica, variety Patula Bonzel by Bill. This is a Downsii by me. And look at how much nicer this is grown indoors by Sally. Much darker, really pretty. This is Sansevieria Fisheri singularis. This is a close-up of the more immature form of Singularis Fisheri. This is only a 3-inch pot, and this is the small Singularis, and this is what it looks like when it's mature. And if you look at the center of this here, you'll see the less mature form. So I find it an interesting Sansevieria. Ah, here we are with the Hallei. This is by Bill Will. This is Jim Gardner's. And this is mine, not so mature. This is Masoniana by Jim Gardner. And mine by Mimi. Not so mature, but very tall. A Sansevieria parva Gilded by Bill Wilk. And again, look at the variegation at the edge. That yellow variegation. This is Sansevieria Star Power cultivar. This is Trifasciata by Sally Festo. Trifasciata by Phyllis. It's like a honey-eye dwarf, but what I love about this one is the variegation is yellow is in the center and the outer is green, which is really a special cultivar. It's a beautiful one. This is a Trifasciata with the, and here's another Trifasciata honey-eye jade dwarf. And a Trifasciata by Sally, is also gorgeous. Our Echinopsis and Lobivia in the open class. This is Bill Wilk's many Echinopsis blooms. And this is Frolic, with a B, frolicking. And Galaxy, Echinopsis Windigo, Echinopsis oxygona, with those tall stalks. This is my Echinopsis Los Angeles. This stalk is about 8 inches. And here's Ancistrophora subspecies Rachnicampa. Let's go back, by Laura Woodley. Nice. Baccabergi by Laura Woodley. An Echinopsis by Phyllis. She caught it just before the bloom. This is really just before the bloom. Another hybrid by Phyllis. And this is Profuse Bloomer by Phyllis. Echinopsis hybrid by Sally. And this is a close-up of a flower and the Echinopsis hybrid by Sally. Another hybrid by Sally with another bloom visible. Pentlandi by Laura Woodley.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Another hybrid by me. Saltensis by Laurel. Pretty one. Wish I knew the hybrid name, but I don't. This is a Hakujo cultivar. This is an Echinopsis by Jim Gardner. Another Echinopsis by Jim. I love that color. Lobivia arachnicantha, variety densicetta. Arachnicantha. And Lobivia hematocantha, variety ablaensis by Gary. Got that in, Gary. Looks really pretty. Lobivia longispina. Lobivia winteriana by Sally. Now this is called Echinobivia Oh Wow by Laurel. And this is Echinobivia Oh Wow by Jim Gardner. So I'm not sure which, who got it wrong. When I finally looked it up, Oh Wow is supposed to have red flowers, but your yellow flowers are pretty.
Yeah, it came from plant propagation at South Coast. That was on.
That's it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you all.
There we go. Then it's the red one that's correct.
It's probably the red one's correct.
Yeah, and they just didn't get it labeled right.
Yeah.
Now I understand. That's the problem.
Yeah, but you had to know where it came from. So
yeah, they made a mistake.
The yellow one, when we had the conference in Arizona several years ago, we were on a tour of Boyce Thompson Arboretum and John Traeger. There was one plant, a Lobivia, growing on the ground, not a Lobivia, I think it was Trichoceros. And it had a big yellow flower, about 4 to 5 inches across. And John Traeger walked by and said, "Oh, that's Trichoceros Betty's Gold."
Oh, okay.
And I said, "Oh, great," because I think I got that one too. I'm not sure where I got it from, but the flower looks almost identical to that one.
Okay, well, I'll look up Betty's Gold. Maybe I'm going to be changing my label.
Okay.
Let me know what you find out.
Okay, Jim. You don't have the yellow one, Jim?
I have the yellow one. Yeah, she showed it.
Oh,
well,
yours is red.
No.
I have the red one.
He does have an Echinopsis yellow one. Do you want to see it again?
Yeah, go ahead. Can you run back?
Yeah.
Because that's the yellow one that you got labeled, oh wow, from propagation. Because they all came from me.
Uh-oh. Now I understand. Did you ever have Betty's Gold, Jim?
This is the first I've ever heard that name.
All right, let me.
I'm glad Gary remembers.
Let me try something else.
Well, I put it as a note on my phone so I could remember when I got home. Mm-hmm. And mine bloomed. Mine's in bloom right now, and so I looked up the name again because I was going to post it.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous flower.
Oh yeah, but it's a really light yellow flower.
No, mine's pretty intense.
Let's see.
Yellow.
It's an intense yellow that we have. Yeah.
I got several yellow ones in bloom. Let's see which. No, it's a real yellow flower.
Okay.
Okay, I've got it up on my computer, and this is.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah, those are mine.
Okay. Yeah, the plant body looks very much like what I have. It's kind of a sprawling.
Yeah.
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 Right.
It looks like this because it's the same thing.
Okay.
It's the same plant.
And you don't have a real name on it.
If I ever did, it's long since crumbled into whatever those plastic labels crumble into.
Well, it may be buried in all those spines. Who knows? Okay.
Oh, I think you should look for it, Tim.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we'll have a party and we'll.
Okay. He'll take it apart.
Crack open that plant.
Yeah.
You should keep your plant names in a database.
Oh, yeah, there you
Now,
go.
now there's a thought.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I've been doing a photo database.
Ooh.
Last
I'm going to be
summers.
a bit of a spoiler here and point out that we have a contravention of the rules by the Wong family. They have been scoring points as individuals. The rule says that you can't switch to being a couple.
No, we could do one. We could do one each. They're actually both mine.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can give them to Cliff.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I got it from Cliff and I wasn't sure whose was whose, so. But they've been sent, usually they send to me with their own name.
Good, fine. Sorry.
Today I just didn't know which was which. So we'll give them to Cliff.
A whopping 3 now.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording for the purposes of the rest of our meeting.